Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. Today, I'm joined by Corey Seemiller, an award-winning leadership professor and author of The Soulmate Strategy. We'll hear about her own separation and healing journey and how writing her book became part of that process. Corey opens up about what worked, what didn't, and the role of self-compassion and vulnerability along the way. She also shares the surprising ways writing such a personal book has influenced her career and research. Finally, we explore practical tips for moving forward after separation and creating healthier, more sustainable relationships. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Corey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's lovely to meet you. I'm very excited about this episode. The context for this one then is going to be how to feel better after separation. And I'm especially interested in this because who wouldn't want to feel better after a separation? But before we get into the meat and bones of that, Corey, why don't you just start by sharing a bit about your own personal separation story, if you would?
Absolutely. The book that I have written is about the healing journey that took place after a particular separation. And frankly, what I think is most interesting about it is it wasn't my longest relationship. It wasn't the relationship that I was most embedded. I was in a domestic partnership arrangement that was twice as long as this particular separation, had a child, had assets, all of the things. But I will tell you from firsthand experience, and many of your listeners might know this, is that time is relatively irrelevant when it comes to hurt and heartbreak. You can have the biggest heartbreak in the world by separating from someone who you've been with for a year and also feel very little with someone you're separating with for 30 years. And so for me, I've been asked, why did I write about this particular separation when I've had one in particular that was longer and more significant as a relationship? And I said, because this one hurt the most. And so my separation story was I was with my partner for 7 years and we lived together. We had a life together and everything. And we were in COVID. And as you know, COVID either had a tendency to bring people together or pull people apart. And we struggled during that particular time. And we couldn't seem to find our way back to each other. And it got to the point where I tried and tried. And again, many of your listeners might feel a sense of familiarity with this, where you've invested, you don't want to start over, you don't want to lose the love that you have, but you know you can't stay, but you know you can't go. And that kind of torment of being caught in the in-between. And I tried and tried to salvage the relationship and it just wasn't going to be. And so after about almost a year of doing that kind of, song and dance, we ended up separating. And it was a relatively kind of brutal separation. It was tough. And so, in my book, I describe it a little bit more, but it was really difficult. And I think what I learned from that and that particular breakup, it was one of the very few that I've had that I was kind of blindsided. And so what I learned in the process of that is I was dealing with the grief of the separation, the sadness, the loss, the idea that we weren't going to have a future together. But I was also dealing with what was a traumatic response from how the breakup happened. My partner had, relatively blindsided me in the middle of a reconciliation process that was going great. And I did not see that coming, even though we had kind of been on and off again. And then repartnered incredibly quickly and had a house and proposed to somebody within just a couple months of our separation. And so I had to go through two kind of separate healing processes. One was the grief, and then one was the trauma of kind of how it happened. So I know when people are separating, there's many reasons why they do, but having to tend to both of those and do very different things to deal with grief and trauma was an important part of my process for healing.
So do you think it was the blindsiding that sort of had the biggest impact then? The fact that you just didn't see this coming, and so it was the shock element of it is that linked, or is it the trauma that actually, when you say this was the worst one, is it, or is it just impossible to separate the two? Is that like me asking you, is it nature or nurture? I don't know.
I mean, it was a little bit of both. So for one thing, this was unlike the partnership that I had for 13 years prior where we had a child together. By the time we separated, we weren't in love with each other anymore. So that separation did not feel as heartbreaking. In this particular one, I was madly in love with this person, thought we were reconciling. And so I was caught emotionally off guard and even physically off guard because I didn't realize we were ending things that quickly. So between those two things, that felt very different than the other separations that I've had. And so I had to contend with that. So the trauma kept happening because one of the things I had been told after a separation is to the best that you can do is to go no contact with your ex, just to give you and your ex a little bit of a break from each other. Now I understand as someone who's has to co-parent with an ex that the logistically that can be tricky, but you certainly don't have to run in the same social circles and go get coffee after you break up like 5 seconds later. You can just give yourself a little bit of breathing room, and that's okay. And so what I had done is I had gone what I thought was no contact by not contacting having us not contact each other. But then I was allowing my friends and family members to send me information off of social media that they would see. And so I was getting screenshots that were like, hey, look, there's a new person. Hey, look, there's a proposal. Hey, look, they bought a house. And that to me was kind of prolonging the healing from that traumatic breakup because not only were we ending things, it was like, boom, you're moving on. Did you not even love me? And so all of those kind of sense of worth came up for me. And it wasn't until I fully just said to my friends, stop sending me this stuff. I cannot. And then I finally was able to start really, really, truly healing.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it must be like picking a scab almost then. You can't heal if you're constantly picking at that scab. And I guess the way the world is these days, it's very hard to go no contact. You say it like it's a thing, like, oh, we just have to go no contact. And like in the 80s and 90s, probably that was right and okay. And you could probably get away with that. But you're right. Since the whole smartphone thing, no contact feels like pretty tricky unless you're both absolutely determined and everybody around you is on message and has been briefed. You almost need to comms it out, don't you? Like, this is it, right? We're going no contact, therefore, this is how it's got to be. That sounds incredibly challenging.
Yeah, especially if only one person is I mean, my ex did not consent to this, and so we did not have a conversation. I just didn't wanna be contacted, nor did I want to reach out either, but all it takes is one of your friends to not get the memo and send you something until you're all of a sudden spiraling again and reliving this entire breakup.
Yeah. And they're not doing it on purpose. It's just,
No,
they
they
could
think they're
probably
being
think they're
helpful.
helping. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they don't want you to be blindsided
Yeah,
again.
exactly. And I don't want you to think that I'm holding on to information I haven't deliberately told you. And you sort of everyone starts second guessing themselves, don't they? So I can get that. So you decide to write a book. And so how long from, being in the depths of kind of relationship breakup despair before you decide to write the book, and why write the book?
Yeah, so the breakup happened in July, and I had I had already been in therapy just for my own maintenance. I just like to go to my therapist, and so I went to my therapist, and I said, I cannot sit in this hurt forever, and clearly I need to move on." And so I said, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it quickly. And so I started trying everything I could, kind of the more obvious things, making lots of plans with people, distracting myself, all the things that I kind of had known that would help with the healing. And after about 5 months of doing that, I had in that meantime gone to self-help seminars. I started manifesting. I went to an intuitive development coach. I started practice dating. I did all these things. Anything anybody would suggest, I would do them. Well, I started to have these sort of absurd stories about trying all of these things. And my friends were like, what in the world? Is it helping? I'm like, kind of. I mean, some of it is, some of it isn't. And they said, you really got to do something with these stories. And so in November of that year, so about 5 months into this healing process, I thought, I'm just going to make a magazine article about kind of the absurdness of everything I tried. So I wrote a 4,000 word piece that was about the 5 months I had gone through. And I sent it in and I got rejected from the magazine that I sent it to. And in the meantime, time had passed and I just kept writing and writing and writing because all of a sudden, when I had written everything in the past for the 5 months that had already happened, my life had caught up to me. So I submitted this magazine article and more absurd things were going on in my world. So I just kept writing them almost like a live journal. And I thought, okay, I got the rejection from the magazine article and I thought, this is not done. I don't know what's going to happen. Most people write memoirs, from reflecting on the past. I was literally writing the last 7 months of this memoir as my life was unfolding. And I mean, I'd have a interesting day and I would just sit down and write it and write it and write it until I got to about February and I said, I think I'm done. I sent it to an editor and the editor says, you're not done. She said, keep writing. And I said, well, how do I know when I'm going to be done? Because there's no is there an imminent event? I don't know what's going to happen. And she said, write until you feel like the story is told. And she was absolutely right. The story wrapped up at about the 1 year mark. And it just felt like that was the exact moment. But what a fun way to write, like you're writing a memoir in real time, and the process, I don't write about it in the book about writing the book, but the book itself was one of the most healing things I did to get through this whole, kind of feeling of separation and heartbrokenness, and then, making my way into dating again.
I totally hear that. I've written a book called Amicable Divorce. I can totally get that the therapy of writing the book has been incredible to actually put down in one place the things that you've learned. And like you say, some of the stories that have happened along the way is really healing, isn't it? And it's just an incredible way of making sense of what's happened and stringing it together so you've got a journey for yourself. And I found that incredibly valuable. But I hope as well, like you, that in there are some things that have really helped and worked, and that you can pass on to a much wider audience. And I guess that's the kick, isn't it? Now, you, I think, have 44 different tips and tricks, is it, in the book? I mean, we haven't got time to go through them all, but give us some highlights. So you mentioned there some stuff really worked, some stuff was a bit, yeah, dubious, shall we say. So let's start with the good stuff. What do you think, if you had to pick your top 3 tips or whatever, what worked?
Well, definitely anything kind of surrounding my mindset really, really helped. So a couple things I did in that area is I started writing manifests. I didn't know really what manifesting was. And so I went to a couple seminars on it. And it's really about intention setting and laying out kind of how you want to feel in the future about some particular situation. So I wrote a healing manifest. This is how, if I were to say I was healed, this is what it would feel like. And just the process of even writing that made me feel more healed. So that helped me. I also wrote a love manifest. Even at one point in time, I wrote a manifest called the apple of everyone's eye. That was when I was not getting a lot of traction on the dating apps. And I thought, where is everybody? I want to be the apple of everyone's eye. And for whatever reason, something happened. And all of a sudden I was getting winks and smiles and waves. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, be careful what you wish for.
So it's the process then. So let's just say manifesting, it's the process of writing down what you want to happen
Yeah.
and where you want to be. And that in itself create some kind of shift in either you and the way you respond to the world or whatever that actually starts to make things happen for you.
Absolutely. I mean, you can take it from a spiritual point of view where people say it kind of summons the universe to bring you what you want once you have clarity. And then you can also take it from a secular point of view where it's just a really nice goal statement. And you tend to show up in the world in alignment with that once you have clarity as to what it is that you're really looking for. And, for me, I really blend both of those. I think it was just the intention setting, the clarity, the showing up how I wanted to, kind of letting things flow, stop forcing things. Although I really struggled with the forcing of things. That's what ended up being in the book is writing out these 44 things while well-intentioned sometimes was just forcing the process. But I will tell you, some of them really worked. So manifesting was definitely one of them. I used also the law of attraction, which is similar, which is the energy you put out is the energy you get back. And so I started to kind of show up more positively with more optimism. Sometimes when things felt awful, not Pollyanna, not toxic positivity, but just trying to sort of take a better take on what was happening around me. And it wasn't even just with the breakup. It could just be that someone cut me off on the freeway. And instead of getting all angry about it, I would just say, maybe they're in a hurry and if they need to go. And it allowed me to shift my mindset a little bit, allowed me to let go of a lot of stress and angst that I didn't need in other areas of my life. And so that helped me considerably. It created a little bit more sense of peace and calm that I needed. So those were two things. The third thing was probably the social connection, being able to kind of summon old friends, make new friends, connect with my family. I mean, we were just coming sort of out of the height of COVID at the time. So everybody was craving that. And for me, it was really nice to kind of have a reset. And I got to do and try all new things. I tried pickleball. I got to do all sorts of fun things. And that helped broaden my interests, but helped me also create some fresh connections of people who didn't know my old world. It was nice because we didn't get situated in just rehashing everything. It was kind of fresh and new. And I liked having some new people in my world.
Hello, my lovely listeners. I hope you're finding this episode helpful and comforting. I just wanted to take a moment to share some news. I've written a book and it's called Amicable Divorce. It's a practical guide to separating with dignity, supporting your children and navigating finances and co-parenting without unnecessary conflict. It's all the guidance you can usually find on the podcast and much more. If that sounds helpful, you can pre-order it today on Amazon. Thanks so much, and now let's get back to the show. Well, that sounds super interesting. So there were the kind of really top things that worked. So what didn't work then? Where were the big sort of fails as far as trying things out?
One of them was I had this mantra that I would say, and I did it while I was getting like an energy healing similar to Reiki. And I did it one time while walking through this little labyrinth of twinkle lights. And my mantra was, I am grateful for my healing process. And every time I would say it, I would just burst into tears. And I was like, well, as much as I want that to be, and it kind of manifesting that I want that to be, I wasn't grateful for my healing process.
Yeah, it just was too far away. Yeah.
It was too, yeah, I had to sit with it. I had to sit with the discomfort of the feelings. So that mantra, I kept trying to use it in different settings. I bought love crystals. I tried to use the mantra. Like the mantra just wasn't going to be helpful. And then there was a point in time when I just actually was grateful, but it wasn't 2 months out. I was not grateful at all for anything that was happening. So that's one thing that I did. There were a couple other things that, I tried. There's one thing that's often said is, like when I started dating, is if you want to meet somebody, go to places where people are going to be that are similar, like have similar interests. And so I thought that I could go to this used bookstore. And because I like books and I was like, and I like learning and it's used. So like people are thrifty and I would go and I would lurk at the bookstore. And I don't know what I was thinking. Like maybe somebody would just like walk over to me and be like,
say hi.
hey, you
Like
want to
they
go
do
on
in
a
the
date with
movies.
me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. There was nothing like that. At one point, had gone a couple times. I was literally the only one in the section I was standing in. But there was one, and I don't write about this in the book, but because it was there was a lot. But one of the times I was there, it was in an evening, and I'm lurking, and I'm one of the only people in the store. And I walked out and afterwards, and I walked through the sliding glass doors, and there was a very belligerent, incoherent man stumbling through the parking lot, kind of yelling at me. So much so that I had to go back into the bookstore, and they had to have security escort me to my car. So like that really just didn't work. I never met my person at the bookstore. Even though going to places where you're going to meet people is great, that just was the lurking.
It just
It was
doesn't
just
happen.
not it.
I tried so I decided to buy myself a paddleboard when I turned 50 and I was really into my paddleboarding and I was thinking the same. I'll just join a paddleboarding club and then, I'll meet somebody who's got a similar interest. But it never happened. Everybody was always married. And then I realized that what I liked about paddleboarding was the solitude and just being able to go off on my own and be in nature on my own,
Yep.
not actually have to make conversation with somebody else's husband. It was just
Right.
for God's sake, this is just a ball ache. Oh God. Yeah. So what else didn't work then?
Oh, goodness. Well, I will tell you one thing that sort of had mixed reviews for me was I did a lot of hiking. And so one of the things I had done was I hiked the Grand Canyon twice with friends. And the first time we hiked to the bottom and back up in one day. And that was exciting, exhilarating. I'd never done that. But the second one we had done was we wanted to hike rim to rim, which was about 23 miles across to the Grand Canyon Lodge. And then the next morning we would hike all the way back. So about 46 miles. And I mean, great idea, right? I'm going to be out in nature. I'm going to conquer this physical challenge. And so while I do think in some ways I do put a check mark in the win category, I also put a check mark in the loss category because about a mile into the first day going down, I had somehow twisted my knee and it was hurting. I mean, it was hurting and I had to drag my leg to the bottom and And then, at that point, once you're down there, you got to get yourself out. So I had to spend the whole day in excruciating pain, made it to the other side. And a friend of mine that I was with said she had found out that someone had died the day before on the path that we were coming back up the next day. And she said, your knee is killing you. You really should, for safety reasons, take the shuttle back to the side. We'll meet you over there. And, you know, I said, I would rather die than do that. So, and so I don't give it as good hiking advice, but for me, I was in such a space that I felt like if I didn't do this, it would be the one thing that I failed at this healing journey. So I forced myself, and I thought, I'm going to need surgery. Who knows what's wrong with me? And thankfully there was no permanent damage, and I probably for safety should have taken the shuttle. It was a bad idea to push myself that hard. But there was another part of me that was sort of proud that I made it across. So I live in both spaces at the same time. So that's one I would say I've got mixed reviews on.
It's so interesting because you talked a minute ago about this kind of mindset thing, and it feels like there was a very determined mindset in you. So you would take this wasn't just a healing journey that was washing over you. It wasn't a passive thing. It was a healing journey you went after that you made a very disciplined effort with. How much is that mindset the absolute key thing to dealing with whatever relationship trauma or relationship getting over you need to do?
I mean, it's significant. The good part about the mindset shift is that you have a greater capacity to do things that you want to do, to show up in ways you want to show up if you allow yourself to do those things. The part that gets tricky is if you become so determined that you work against your own interests, like me dragging my leg across the Grand Canyon, or me being so set that these things on my checklist were somehow going to magically heal me. And while they did help, and I would advocate for people to try things that are different through the healing process. It was that forcefulness and that control and that determination that became almost too much at one point. And I talk about it in my book about how you can't control how you heal. You can do the best you can. Like you can't speed up a wound on your hand. I mean, you can put some medicine on it and bandages, but at the end of the day, you can't just wish it to be gone. And that's the same with heartbreak. And so it kind of had a little bit of a mix for me with that.
Do you think that's what you were trying to do, either consciously or subconsciously, to speed up the healing process?
Yep, absolutely. Because nobody wants to feel horrible. And what's interesting about it is no one wants to feel horrible, but it's also really hard to know that the person you're feeling horrible from, not because they did something to you, but because of the breakup or the separation or the divorce, is thriving, right? So there's a little bit of it's maybe for some people it's competition. It wasn't that for me, but it was wow, if you can find that and you can find your true love. I mean, at one point there was a hashtag. It was hashtag when you know. And it was like just weeks after we had split up. And it was like, I want to know when I know. And I wanted it too, kind of a place of envy. And so that propelled me into wanting to rush to that point before I was ready. But like I said, some of the things I did helped me at least be intentional about the process. And I probably did heal more quickly because of that intention. But at the end of the day, I realized that you could have as much intention and determination as you want. Healing is just healing, and you have to go through it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you put a really good foundation for healing in. And then, like you say, the process of healing then has to unfold. But you wiped the wound, you cleaned the wound, you aerated it, you got it ready, and then you had to just wait whilst it healed, didn't you? So it sounds like you did all the basics. I'm just wondering where the self-compassion was, because I love this because it just fits my kind of personality. I would, if something horrible happens, I want to plan, I want a goal, I want the next step. I'm very disciplined about those things. I'm out there, I'm in nature, I'm doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing. And yeah, and I'm impatient. So, so what you're talking about definitely appeals to me. And I'm fairly pragmatic, so I'll take a few failures along the way. I'm not that worried about it. I just find it so appealing. But I am sitting here also thinking it is very disciplined. And where is your self-compassion during this time? Are you feeling compassionate towards yourself, or it feels very army, get up, cold showers? It doesn't feel very snuggle down with a blanket, a box of chocolates and a sad film and the tissues, because that's just as good on some days kind of thing. But you tell me.
My definition of self compassion changed over that course of the year. At first, I thought that having this plan was self-compassion. I loved myself enough to not sit in this state of turmoil, and I wanted to love myself, and I was willing to try things, and if they didn't work, I was also willing to let them go and move on, which was kind of my version of self-compassion. Sort of by the end, I realized that self-compassion was basically just saying, sometimes you just need to feel horrible and let yourself feel horrible, and that's the only way you're gonna get through it, is to just get through it, not around it, not over it, not with your 44-point checklist. And so, my definition really did change over time, and I said, "It's okay that you feel this. It's important that you feel this, because if you didn't feel this, then you didn't really love, in the way that you believe that you did," right? And so, yeah, I actually thought I was being compassionate, and then I realized that wasn't the kind of self-compassion that was serving me.
Mm. It's so interesting, isn't it? So you've written your book, you've done your 44 steps, you've taken the rough with the smooth, and you've found this place of ending. Then what was it like then to write a book where you had obviously some strategies, which were great and that would potentially help other people, but where you kind of had to bare your soul to such an extent? What did that feel like? It must have been incredibly tricky.
Yeah, in writing this book, about the whole process was incredibly vulnerable, and there's 2 parts to it. One is, I think that when people are going through this type of heartbreak, they are feeling these things. A lot of people are trying these things without making it a formalized 44-point checklist. People are struggling. They're writhing on the floor in tears and then get up and have to go to work that day. And this is the real life of people. And so I'm saying the story that so many people have. And I felt kind of a pull or a calling to do that, because when I was first going through this, I searched around for these kind of vulnerable, messy, raw, heartache kind of stories that would make me feel validated. That would say, "You are not alone. You're not the only person that is literally can't figure out how to get your, head up off the pillow in the morning." But I was reading a lot of more perky and peppy and "you can do this." And while that was useful, I also wanted to read about, this is hard. And so, once I realized that I was kind of telling a larger narrative that cuts across gender, sexual orientation, age, heartbreak is heartbreak, I realized that I had a calling to put this out into the world for other people to have and to hold, so that they know that they're not alone in their feelings. And so, being vulnerable was not just part of what I truly experienced in the process, but being vulnerable was my only way of being able to tell the story how it really is, and not sugarcoating it, or "it's gonna be okay," or "rah, rah." And, it's the soulmate strategy. It's not the, "Hey, this is how I found my soulmate in 1 year, check the box." It's the soulmate strategy. It was the strategy that I went through to try to find my soulmate, and it is not pretty at parts. And I need other people to know that that journey doesn't have to be pretty. Just,
Yeah.
just
That it's
being
okay
authentic is
to
the most
bring it in
important
all
thing.
its messiness and shaggy ends and all the rest of it. Yeah. But do you think it had an impact? Because I mentioned in the intro that you're a professor of leadership and a global generational expert. Did you feel a sense of vulnerability in that being your kind of, this is what you do, this is what you're known for, and then having to sort of dish the dirt on yourself almost?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I first started writing this and I had the magazine article, I had sent it out to several professional colleagues and I said, "Is this going to kind of hurt me professionally? Are people going to say, I don't want this person who's a big mess like this to come speak at our conference? What about my students? If they got a hold of a copy, would that be okay?" And every single person I talked to said, "This makes you more real and it makes you more relatable." And they said, "And if there's somebody who's not going to hire you to speak at a conference because you went through a messy breakup and told the real story that they probably have been through themselves, then you don't want to speak at their event." And I really thought about that. And I thought, you know what? It's true. And from the about almost 4 years ago now, I started a podcast called Rock That Relationship. And that was part of this healing journey. And we're still going strong. We've done 12 seasons, we've done 122 episodes. And I kind of bare my soul on that. So I got a little precursor to that. And I have several students and professional colleagues who listen to my podcast. So thankfully, this book, although the book is really, really vulnerable, it's not coming out of thin air. They've sort of had a primer for the last almost 4 years of me doing this on my podcast.
Yeah. Well, because I think there is a balance. Like I feel it myself. On the one hand, my day job is working in divorce and separation. On the other hand, I talk about how terribly I did my own, and then you kind of think, oh, do those two things sit side by side? And like you say, is it more authentic? Oh, we've got to tell the truth, but is it more authentic? Do people find you more authentic because they know that you've not done a very good job at something versus, in real life versus just preaching, this is how you should do it and this is what you should do. And it's all going to be all right if you just follow my 5 steps kind of thing. So I always struggle with that. So it's interesting to hear you say that about, how you tackled it. And I think you've got some research out, haven't you, on heartbreak and emotional experience in workplace settings. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, it was interesting because once I started writing this book and then I launched the podcast and then I got some life coaching certifications. I don't do like individual life coaching, but I wanted it to inform sort of my practice. And I teach leadership, and one of the classes I teach is emotional intelligence. So this isn't too far way out of the scope. It's not like I teach math. So all of these things sort of, kind of coalesced into each other. And so I decided that in order to kind of have a better understanding of what people are going through is just to ask them. So I told my story. Now I want to kind of hear your story. So I put out a survey, just a love and relationship survey. And it's actually really neat because the survey goes over lots of different things, everything from, spiritual beliefs to do you believe in soulmates? Have you ever had a crush to, how has your workplace supported you in going through a separation. And then I created a subsequent workbook with it, which is really neat, where you can go through and get your results, and then you can go through and do journaling or discussion questions on your results. So it's kind of a tool for people to use versus just a survey. But as a survey, it did give us a lot of information, particularly around what does it mean when you bring your whole self to your workplace? And your whole self means that particularly people who are going through heartbreak, the according to Holmes and Rahi, who do this stress scale, the number one stressor is death of a spouse, but the
Yeah.
second one is divorce, and the third
Divorce,
one is
yeah. Yeah,
separation.
yeah. No, we often
And
quote
so
that bit of research. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And
huge,
so
isn't it?
but
Yeah.
but it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you can be going through that horrible stuff, but when you come to work, you need to be a worker." And that we tell you that we want work-life balance, or we might say we support your holistic development. We use these big fancy words, but we really don't. And so I wanted to find out more about what people needed and what they wanted and what they were experiencing and what was going on with them. So we've just started looking at the data.
But it's super interesting because that's one of the things that we're looking at as well with Amicable. So we work with divorcing and separating couples, but then we're now going into workplaces to talk about exactly that. What support? Have you got a policy? What support? What's your flexibility about this kind of stuff? What if somebody needs access to therapeutic services? What if people need to sit down and discuss options of where they're going to live and how they look after their kids? Can you signpost them? Do you have that sort of stuff in place? What's your kind of policy on whether they should tell you or not? Is it psychologically safe for them to talk about this stuff at work or not? And I just think it's such a fascinating question for organizations. So I'm really interested in that research, and where can we find it? When will it be published?
Well, we're looking at putting something out probably in the next year. We're still, like I said, we just collected it and we're analyzing it, but we put together some preliminary things that in some ways might be relatively surprising, like as we talk about things, what can organizational policies be to support, people going through this? One of the policies that seems to continue to rise up is having some kind of HR policy on gossip. And that is becoming very impactful to people when they come to work and they're worried that their colleagues are talking about them behind their back. And I don't know what a policy would look like, but some things that might be a little more obscure. We know things like time off, flexibility. We know counseling and support services. We know those things. But there's another huge thing we found that after a breakup, 69% of our participants said they needed time and space to be alone. That might mean time off work, or that might mean just not coming to every single meeting at work, or maybe not being, followed up on by their supervisor every 10 minutes to just give them a little breathing room. But then 67%, because they could check all that they wanted, 67% said that they just need to keep busy. So are there some independent projects that you could give to someone to say, hey, this could take like the next month. It's an independent project. You don't have to come to committee meetings. You don't have to do any of this stuff, work on this project. Could that potentially also help? And so really there's a lot of things that we need to think of kind of outside the main ideas of what could be helpful in the workplace. Because if it's, and you're right, if it's not psychologically safe, you might not even know that an employee is even going through this. So make it safe, create options, and really connect with those workers to make sure that you understand that they're a whole person and they're coming. And this is really hard stuff.
Yeah, and it affects so many people. I mean, it happens several times in your life, doesn't it? And lots of times within your working life. And I think that's the thing. And as we tend to engage in more what are considered to be unstable relationships, shorter relationships. So the idea that you'll have one partner for life is pretty much over. We live too long for that to happen almost now. Therefore, people are going through multiple serious long-term relationships that aren't, as you said right at the beginning, are not necessarily defined by the length of time they've been in them. So I think it's super interesting. I think that becomes more and more relevant. So thank you for that. Now, in just a moment, Corey will share her top tips if you're on a journey to getting better after heartbreak. But before that, if this episode has given you a bit of clarity or comfort or just a tip that's made things feel a little more manageable, then please make sure to follow the Divorce Podcast on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, each week we're here with expert advice and real support to help you through your separation one step at a time. Now, Corey, looking across your own healing journey, your book, and your research, what are the top practical tips you'd offer someone trying to feel better after heartbreak or separation?
The number one is get support where you need it. That might be talking to friends, family, therapist. I actually had a therapist and I also went to a breakup coach. I had two very different experiences. The therapist really dug more into like my childhood and my patterns. The breakup coach really looked at more forward thinking. What do I do to move on and help me create some structure? So get the support that you feel like you need. Some people might find it in spirituality. Some people might find that support in just walking the dog with a neighbor. Whatever that support looks like, that is key. The second thing is really, as I mentioned before, is mindset shift, is really thinking about how you want to show up. I really, really resonated with manifesting and law of attraction as two ways for me to be able to have a mindset shift. I also did some training with an intuitive development coach who, because I had realized that I had overlooked some red flags and I didn't want to miss those kinds of things in the future. So I wanted to sort of work on my intuition so that I could see from the get-go if I was sort of on the right path in the future, so I wouldn't get myself into a relationship that was in some ways bound to be challenging in ways that I didn't want. And so anything around the mindset shifting is really useful. And I think the third part, and this is the most critical part, is you have to feel the feelings. You have to feel the feelings. Do not numb them with, some people numb them with, drinking or substance use. Some people numb them with food. Some people, and this is one of the things I started to do, is they numb them with over programming, where if you just keep yourself so busy, you won't feel them. And that can be just as harmful. And so you sometimes just have to sit and cry, as you were talking about before, maybe, watching a movie and eating your ice cream and crying. You just have to have those moments. Mine happened to take place in my car. I had several of them where I was in my car. It felt like a safe space. I had music on, no one was around, and I could burst into tears. And so feeling the feelings is the only way you're going to get through them.
Yeah, that's super interesting, isn't it? And what would you say to somebody who's perhaps feels stuck or afraid to try again? What's your kind of one piece of advice?
To put themselves back out in the dating world.
Yeah, well, just if they feel stuck and they just, they can't go on.
Yeah, I think two things. One is if you're stuck, you have to identify whether you're stuck out of fear of moving on, which some people will make themselves stuck because they're not ready to let go. Whether they think their ex is going to come back or whether they aren't ready to, make a new life for themselves, they make themselves stuck out of fear. So part of that is working with, a therapist or a counselor or someone to figure out what it is that you're doing to make yourself stuck and why. That's important. The other part is people who are just genuinely stuck and they want to move forward. What they do is they try to force to try to become unstuck, and they stay more stuck. So sometimes it's just, in that case, just taking a step back, breathing. And I learned really the hard way is going with the flow and taking opportunities that come about. So if you feel stuck, don't try to force anything. Sit with it for a minute. And if there's an opportunity, some neighbor says, hey, do you want to go on this trip? We have an extra, space in our cabin. You want to come with us? Sure. Like in some ways, not creating that process is also very, very useful. And sometimes it just takes one thing, like you're not trying to get people to go to a cabin. You're not trying to force it. You just like, okay, sure, I'll go. And you just take advantage of things that come up. Sometimes that'll just knock you right out of your stuckness. And so they happen for different reasons, but I would say those are two things that would really help. And I'll say as far as sort of moving on and repartnering, that the same thing, repartner when you're ready. If you do it really, really fast, you're probably not giving yourself a lot of time to heal unless you've been in a long-term relationship where you felt very isolated for a long time and you've done that processing. But a lot of times you just need to give yourself a little bit of a reset. But there are people that, I went to a women's circle one time as part of this process, and people were talking about, their divorces. And there were people there that were like, I got divorced 8 years ago, and they come every week and they're crying every week. And I mean, that their ex is now repartnered, had children with this new person. And at some point you say, I want to honor your healing process, but that feels like maybe
You're
you are doing a
stuck. Yeah,
disservice to
yeah.
yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Absolutely.
recognizing what for you feels like when you're ready to move on. And maybe it isn't ever repartnering. You can do that, or, it's really up to you, but you'll know, but assess whether you believe you're stuck and if you're sticking yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much indeed. I've really loved this conversation. It's been absolutely fantastic. Where can people find out more information about you?
They can go to thesoulmatestrategy.com, and you can find links there to my book. You can also link from those pages up to my podcast called Rock That Relationship, where you can find that on Spotify, Apple, Google, any of the main podcast channels. And so those are two of the best places to find me.
And the book again, just remind us of the title of the book.
It's called The Soulmate Strategy: My Imperfect Plan to Conquer Heartbreak and Find True Love.
I love it. I love it. That's going to be on my bookshelf very quickly. Don't forget, for separation and co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources or book a free advice consultation. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates and visiting thedivorcepodcast.com or on your favorite listening platform. And finally, don't forget, we'd love to know how we can help more. So please share questions about divorce, separation, or co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you so much, Corey, for joining me. It's been absolutely fabulous. And thank you, everybody, for listening.